Hello, everyone. Thank you welcome to the Preemie Chats, and thank you all of you for joining us here today. I'm Fabiana Bacchini, Executive Director of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation. CPBF is a charitable organization, and our mission is to support and educate families of premature babies. This Preemie Chat series is one of the many initiatives we have to bring information for NICU families and healthcare professionals. Here every Friday, we talk with experts, researchers, and parents who share with us their experience and knowledge. Also on our website, canadianpreemies.org, parents will find all kinds of resources and support. And today we're going to talk about the F words in childhood disability in recognition of World Cerebral Palsy Day on October 6th. The 21st century is witnessing a sea change in our thinking about disability. Nowhere are these developments more apparent than in the field of childhood disability. In his paper, The F Words in Child Disability, I Swear This Is How We Should Think, Dr. Rosenbaum has tried to package a set of ideas grounded in the World Health Organization's International Classification of Functioning, Disability, and Health into a series of what he has called F Words in Child Neurodisability: function, family, fitness, fun, friends, and future. He hopes this will be an appealing way for people to incorporate these concepts into every aspect of clinical service, research, and advocacy regarding disabled children and their families. And I have here joining me live from Ontario, Dr. Peter Rosenbaum, who is a developmental pediatrician at McMaster University, where he pursues a mixture of clinical work in neonatal follow-up, health services research with a focus on functioning and family well-being, writing scientific papers and invited thought pieces, teaching graduate students, lecturing, and editing. He co-founded Can Child Center for Childhood Disability Research and is a co-creator of the F Words work. Dr. Rosenbaum, thank you so much for joining us here today. What a pleasure to be talking to you.
Thank you very much. It's a great opportunity.
That is wonderful. And I also have here with me Brenda Agnew, who is the proud mother of two boys, Chase and Mclean. Her youngest son, Mclean, has cerebral palsy and profound hearing loss. Since Mclean was diagnosed, she has been tireless in advocating for better systems and programs for children with special needs. She believes that there is much personal empowerment in having the ability to provide substantial input on how policies, programs, and priorities are created and communicated, and how incorporate and engage families. Brenda is a client liaison for Brooklyn lawyers, helping other families navigate their journey with the legal system, drawing on her own experience after her son's brain injury, and is also a school board trustee at the Halton Catholic District School Board. Brenda is involved in various local, provincial, and national organizations, including CPNet, and she's the creator and moderator of PAL, Parent Advocacy Link, which is an online Facebook group of over 2,000 special needs parents. Brenda, thank you so much for joining me here today. And I should say that you're also my mentor in this journey with my son, who has cerebral palsy, and became my good friend. So thank you both for being here today.
Oh, thanks so much, Fabi, for having us.
Okay, so let's start this conversation. Dr. Rosenbaum, a lot of parents who follow us are parents of preemie babies, and some of those preemies will have cerebral palsy. So let's start to unpack what is cerebral palsy and how do you define cerebral palsy to a parent and to a healthcare professional?
This is a question that's been asked for the last 150 years. The current way of thinking about cerebral palsy is that it is a group of conditions which have in common problems in the development of motor control caused by an injury to the developing brain. And I'm not giving you the exact words of the definition, but the concepts are that the injury happens and stops happening, but leaves behind what is in effect a scar. And that impairment in the brain interferes with the easy, ordinary development of motor control. What's been added to the diagnosis in the 2007 international revision of the definition is a second sentence that reminds people that while cerebral palsy is a problem in motor development, there are often other additional impairments in vision and or hearing and or learning and or behavior and or muscle imbalance, which causes orthopedic problems. And so cerebral palsy is more than a motor or can be more than a motor disorder.
So, and when you, okay, let's talk about how you talk to parents about that a little bit later. I just want to bring Brenda in the conversation. Brenda, share a little bit of your story with Mclean and to the point you received that diagnosis.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So Mclean is a surviving twin. He was born at 29 weeks as a result of a condition known to twin transfusion. And unfortunately, his brother passed away in utero. And so Mclean was the donor twin, and he needed to be delivered in order to give him the best chance at survival and at success. And so he was born at 29 weeks and spent 3.5 months in the NICU. Where, he had all of the usual premature things that happen, the Brady's, the Appies, all that sort of stuff. And then when he was about 3 months old, he was diagnosed with profound to severe hearing loss, which we were not expecting at all. And then at about a year old, he received a formalized diagnosis of cerebral palsy, although we did have a fairly good indication earlier on that this was going to be this diagnosis was possibly coming. And actually, coincidentally, all these years later, Mclean is 14 now, but Dr. Rosenbaum was actually our developmental pediatrician at the time, and so he had the unfortunate task of providing us with that diagnosis at the time and answering all of those really difficult to answer questions. So that's our story in a little nutshell up until we were diagnosed with cerebral palsy for our son.
Okay, so let's now, because I think it's very important, we had this conversation several times on how to deliver the news and what you do with the piece of information once you leave the office. Dr. Rosenbaum, I know you have a very different approach, a very personal approach of delivering news for parents. I would like you to talk to us about it, because I have a heartbreaking way of receiving a diagnosis because I was pretty much alone in the room. So I want to hear your approach and how you talk to parents about it and what is the follow-up after that.
Well, the first thing to say is that nobody ever gets to see a developmental pediatrician just walking in off the street. They've been referred to us by somebody else on the basis of concerns that already exist. So I want to know when I first meet a family, why are you here and how can I be helpful? I want to know what they know already and what they've been told. And given that Dr. Google never shuts her office, there's a huge amount of information available to people, some of it credible and some of it not credible, and it's not always easy to tell which is which. Then there are the things that the family doctor, another pediatrician may have said with good intentions. Then there are all the things that the grandparents, the aunts and uncles, the friends, the mailman, everybody tells the family. So I want to know what the family knows already and try to build whatever I'm going to say on top of that. And I say that because often people arrive with a lot of concerns and worries that are either misguided or maybe appropriate about cerebral palsy, but don't apply to your child with cerebral palsy. So the conversation has to be an individualized, focused conversation rather than a talk I might give to medical students or trainees in pediatrics.
So when families leave your office with that diagnosis, I know you told me something that I wish I had to get a personal call to see how the parent is doing a couple of days later. So talk to us about your experience in doing that, and how do you think families perceive that?
What I have tried to do for many, many years is invite the family at the end of a first interview, a first discussion. I invite the family to come back in a week or two and to bring anybody and everybody who's important to them, grandparents, aunts and uncles, best friend, whatever, because we need to go over the same the same issues. It's not the same conversation, because in the time between the first conversation that we have together and the time I see families again in a week or two, they've done a lot of thinking, a lot of reading, a lot of listening, a lot of worrying. And I want to know, first of all, what did you hear me say? What questions do you have? And often we go over much of the same material or the same questions, but of course they're not the same questions, because they're being asked at a different point in a person's experience. And some of the most interesting and exciting and I think rewarding experiences I've ever had are those second conversations with the extended family, with the uncle who is the one who asks all the questions. We were wondering, or what about, or we heard. And as long as that's okay with the family, that's okay with me. What I will not do is talk to your mother or your sister or your best friend without you.
Okay, Brenda, what is your take?
So I will say that everything that Dr. Rosenbaum is saying was our experience, and what really, even as he's talking now, it was a long time ago, but you never ever forget that day of diagnosis. I always say to parents that there was a before and after. Is a very definitive line, and your life was different before and your life is different after. But what was interesting about Mclean is, further to the point, is we had an indication that he was at risk. Right? He had been through a traumatic situation at birth. He'd spent months in the NICU. He was very hypotonic. So for those who may not know what that is, it's just very low muscle tone. So I remember researching hypotonia. And I remember meeting with Dr. Rosenbaum before the diagnosis and me saying, I think it's hypotonia. And I remember him saying, okay, well, what does that mean to you? And I said, oh, it can be brain-based, it can be muscle-based, it can be. And so we had a whole conversation about what each of those meant and how that could be affecting Mclean. And what was interesting about it, it was a general way to ease into what I think Dr. Rosenbaum knew was going to inevitably be a conversation about cerebral palsy. But what it did is it set the stage to recognize that my questions, my research were all relevant, that he was taking what I had to say seriously, that he was taking the time to understand what it was that I knew and I was asking. And I have to say that, those initial conversations were probably much harder than the day that we actually received our diagnosis, because we had some time in between to talk about all of those risk factors, to talk about the things we had been noticing. And then when he did receive his diagnosis, I will tell you this again, I will never forget this, because I spent 3 days in bed crying. And I remember a phone call came and I couldn't take the call. And so I actually emailed Dr. Rosenbaum and I said, what does this mean? I don't understand. And I think I'm a fairly articulate, intelligent person, but you're overwhelmed with emotion. And I said, what does this mean? What is level 4 or 5 GMS? What does all of this information you're giving me mean? What type of cerebral palsy are you referring to? And he sent me back a very comprehensive response. And I used that response when I sent the news out to our friends and family. And I said, this is what's transpired. I can't talk about it now, but here are some questions that have been answered, and here's some more information. So please take the time to read this before we talk in person. So by the time we got around to having the conversation with friends and family, they had already had a good indication of what this might mean for Mclean and our family moving forward. And it helped me to not have to have that difficult talk later on. So that's what I recall the most out of that process. And obviously I haven't forgotten it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is a conversation that we do not forget. And I think always sits with us and for the rest of our lives and what it means to receive that diagnosis. For me, I also had to spend some time processing. And Brenda was actually the first parent that I met who had been in the ICU, her preemie son, and had the diagnosis of cerebral palsy because I had not met anyone before. So I think was very important for me to have that conversation with Brenda, how the future looks like, because she's a few years ahead of us. But I really had a hard time how to talk to family about it because I was still processing. And we also didn't know if Gabe was going to be able to sit down or not, or be able to stand or not. So there was so many unknowns because he was so young. And I think that is my next question, Dr. Rosenbaum, because in the beginning, I feel a lot of parents, we do so many therapies and hours of therapy, trying to perhaps fix the problem. So let's talk about that. I will leave at that because obviously years later, I have a completely different perspective on that. But in the beginning, I was on that quest that the more therapy I did, the better outcome Gabriel would have with CP. So let's discuss that a little bit. I think it's very important for families to know from a developmental pediatrician.
Can I just make one comment before that? And that is that not all people with cerebral palsy were premature, and certainly not all premature babies have cerebral palsy.
Right.
So for people listening who are the parent of a premature baby, you're not automatically on a slippery slope to cerebral palsy.
Absolutely. Thank you for clarifying that.
The question you ask, I like to say that the original F word in our field was fix. And I think fixing is a fabulous idea. And if I had wanted to be a fixing doctor, I would have been an orthopedic surgeon on a ski hill and fixed lots of broken wrists and ankles. And I don't mean that rudely. I am jealous of orthopedic surgeons who work in trauma and are able literally to fix things. Most of medicine is not about fixing. We don't fix diabetes, just in case anybody thinks that cerebral palsy is different. It's not different. What we're trying to do, and what we've learned over time, is that all the therapy in the world is not going to make the cerebral palsy go away. So then the question is, what is this therapy or that therapy or any other therapy meant to do? And originally, our thinking was that it was going to change the level of spasticity or increase the range of motion of the major joints. And this in turn would allow people to function better. And sometimes that's true and often it's not. And what we've done is to shift past therapy for its own sake to say, what is it that this child wants to do? What is it this family would like this child to be able to do? And how can we help that to happen? And now we are much more interested in functioning, just as two of the three of us in this call need help to see properly. Nobody fusses that we have glasses, but if we all had cerebral palsy, somebody might say, why didn't they have more therapy? Whereas being able to function and have a decent life, even if you do things differently, is a philosophical difference from how we have traditionally worked and thought.
Absolutely, but I think for me as a parent, I had to sit down and reevaluate my own values and views and perceptions on disability.
Absolutely.
Because I don't think I had an opinion before Gabriel until I was faced with having a child disability, but what it means to have a child disability, what disability really means. I think it is some time that we need to reflect as parents when you're going to embark on that journey. Brenda, what is your insights on that?
Yeah, so, and I meet a lot of parents who are newly diagnosed, and like you and I talked about, Fabiana, when you received your diagnosis for your son, I think it's that automatic piece as a parent to want to fix, if that's the right term, right? You want to give your child everything you can. And so you're faced with all of these options and these interventions. And I say to, I will never minimize a parent's desire to want to do that. I'll never talk them out of it because they need to go through that process. And listen, I'm not even going to minimize the impact of therapies. There are children who benefit immensely from therapies, but in different ways. It may not be functional, but it might help with their pain or their quality of life or things like that. So I try to frame for them just to explore everything, but keep the perspective of what your ultimate outcome is with respect to those interventions. And for me, I think what changed sort of along the way, and I don't want to jump ahead, maybe I am, but if I relate it to the F words, is you get to a point where you have to evaluate all of the interventions you're doing. And I'm going to take an example like Mclean. He has a lot of stuff going on: PT, OT, speech and language, auditory, verbal. I mean, there's a lot of therapies happening. And we had to make a decision as a family because we were emotionally exhausted, physically exhausted, financially exhausted, and we had to really prioritize. We sat back and said, what is important to us? What is important to him? And we shifted our focus. And so then it was friends and it was future. And we focused a little bit more on speech therapy because I thought that's what's going to help him function better. And so we reassessed our initial thoughts around therapy and what they meant, and shifted our thinking, and then focused our efforts in a different way and used the F words as the outcomes we wanted to have for him. And knowing that things like function might be very different for Mclean than they might be for someone else's child. But what did function mean for him? And what did future mean for him? And then how were we going to work towards that? It reshaped our goals, the way we thought about things.
Yes, I really want to talk about the F words. I'm just going to say hello to Katarzyna. She's joining us from Poland here.
Wow.
And I have Sarah and baby Lachlan. They're always on our live on Fridays. And I want to bring Lori's comment. Lori, thank you for joining us. Lori is in Kenora, Northern Ontario, on the border of Manitoba. She said, I love the comment that nobody gets referred to a developmental pediatrician without a reason. It's hard knowing we have risks, delays, and just have to wait and see. It's been hard to getting follow-up with provincial borders. It's hard to seek support without a diagnosis. The wait and see game is really exhausting. Lori's son, I think Scott, is about 1.5 years now, if I'm not wrong, Lori. Dr. Rosenbaum, any comment on that?
Well, my first comment is to say hi to Lori, not because I know her, but because I got married in Kenora. That's a story for another day. I think that one of the points that Lori raises at the end of her comment is what I call the tyranny of diagnosis. What I mean is that Brenda knew there were concerns about her son long before a diagnosis. And it should never, I don't know that it was the case that she couldn't get services until Mclean had a diagnosis. But if that were the case, that's absurd. We should be looking at functioning and challenges with functioning and try to explain them with a diagnosis if we can. But the diagnosis of cerebral palsy in today's conversation tells us very little about what to do, what the outlook is, how to help a family. And if we talk about functioning and impairments and challenges in functioning, we can be offering advice while also trying to understand why there's a problem. And it is to me absurd that we're still stuck on diagnosis as the key that opens the door.
And I wanted to just jump in on that because I agree we knew that there was going to be risks. So further to Lori's message, we knew he was, again, not every premature infant is going to have cerebral palsy. But he did have some risk factors. And so thankfully we lived in a region where he was referred because of a Preemie pathway that was with our local health organization, our local health unit. And so, right away he's premature. There's a good chance he may have some things going on. Let's get him into that pathway and then let's see where that goes. And I remember the first time I met with Dr. Rosenbaum as part of this, the first thing he said to me is, are you connected with resources? Are you connected with supports? What referrals do we have to put in? And that we didn't get a diagnosis for months and months and months after that. But it was key that we understood what was available to us, because even if he never ended up with a diagnosis, to Lori's point, he was still delayed. He still had things going on. And you don't want to miss that precious time when you could be working on these interventions. And so thankfully, we were connected through a pathway like that. And I'm sad to hear that that's not the case in every health unit. That's really unfortunate.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm very excited now to bring up the 6 F words for CP. I have this here, and this being sitting on my kitchen. I have a family board that's been there for many years, and this absolutely changed my perception of disability and how we're going to move on with Gabriel and provide him with the best life possible. Fully embracing his diagnosis. And I read this, and I read function, family, fitness, friends, fun, future, which is the goals in life that we have. It really changed the way we parent our son and focus on those things. Dr. Rosenbaum, talk to us how you came up with this. What really excited to create this, because now this tool is being spread all over the world in over 30 languages. And this is absolutely life-changing for many families with kids with disabilities. So let's discuss that, because I think every single center should have this on the door when we walk in.
They're going to. That's another story for later. What isn't shown on that poster is that the F words were our effort to bring the World Health Organization's framework for health, the International Classification of Functioning framework for health, to life. And very briefly, the ICF framework reminds us, and this is for everybody in the world, reminds us that any health condition has associated problems in body structure and function. And that health condition may interfere with being able to do things in day-to-day life, which the World Health Organization calls activity, may interfere with people's ability to engage in life in ways that are meaningful for them, called participation. And the World Health Organization effectively demands that we also pay attention to a couple of obvious things. One is personal factors, what floats your boat, and environmental factors, of which there are thousands that influence our day-to-day lives, even when COVID isn't happening. And this set of ideas is all interconnected. And essentially, I like to think of it as making the spotlight a lot bigger than just a spotlight on what's wrong with the body that needs therapy to be fixed. It reminds us that whatever's going on may have impacts on functioning, on participation, in the context of what's important to you as an individual, in the context of your environment. And what we tried to do was just have some fun with this, to bring these ideas to life with some F words. And the original paper is called The F Words in Childhood Disability. I swear this is how we should think. And of course, it was meant to be irritating and talk about F words. And so we talked about fitness, body of body and mind. We talked about function or functioning to bring activity to life. We talked about friendships to bring participation to life. We talked about fun to remind people that personal factors, especially for children, should include fun. And the most obvious F word of all is family, because having been a developmental pediatrician for 50 years, I have never, ever had a 3-year-old come to clinic on their own and say, "Doc, you gotta help me. My behavior sucks and I don't talk good." We always work with families. And so this set of ideas are all interconnected to the World Health Organization's framework. And we added future because the time element in people's lives is not represented in the ICF framework. But children are constantly in a state of being, becoming, belonging. And so we wanted to remind people about the development of children and, by the way, the development of families. So this set of ideas is really just meant to be fun. And what we learned, and I'll finish with this comment, what we learned is that originally these were developed in the context of childhood disability, because that's what I do. But then people began to say, these are not just for children with disabilities. And so these are now called the F words for child development.
I like that.
Yeah. Your comments on that?
So I like that, first of all, because I always have I always go through life with the mentality of what's good for one is good for all. And so I really do like that. And, I referenced it a little bit before, and I have to say, I can be a very skeptical person and I can roll my eyes a lot. I'm known for that. And when I first saw the document come out, I thought, what is this? How am I going to have to reshape my thinking? And what's the, inspirational quote I'm going to have to walk around with today? But when you really sat down, right? Because this is not how I roll. But when I sat down and I looked at it, it really did, as I said before, it redefined our priorities. And it really helped us to focus our energy as a family, focus our attention on the things that the F words addressed. And so we look at things through that framework now. And, so if I use fun as an example, my son loves adventures. There's a lot of things he can't do. That's the reality, right? There's just things you can't do. He loves adventures. And so we as a family make sure that we incorporate that, we budget for that, we plan for that, because that is a fun thing to do. We find ways to incorporate fun into different things that we can do, on a regular basis. And so that was one piece. And then, like I said, also friendship. Friendship is a huge thing for Mclean. And so, what did we need to do as a family to help facilitate those friendships, to help strengthen those friendships? What were the things we could work with school on to help create those opportunities? So it really extended beyond into almost every aspect of how we do things. And it really did. And it's a good reminder. I too keep it handy. And when I'm having a bad day or something is not going the way I want, I have to remind myself, he's happy, he has friends, we have fun, we're planning for the future. He does have function, even if it's not what other people do. And it causes us to stop and celebrate the great things that he has accomplished so that we can be cognizant of that. He's come a long way.
Can I just add that I am willing to bet that the various therapies and interventions that Mclean's had have contributed to that. But I suspect that the Agnews didn't start with therapy in order to get there.
No.
And certainly that's not how they're living their lives now.
Right.
And so we can then turn this the other way and say, there's something that Mclean wants to do. What's interfering with it?
Yeah.
And how can interventions, therapies, technology, whatever, enhance that? But it doesn't have to start with therapy to get there.
Absolutely. And that's a really good point. Sorry, Fabi. I wanted to make a point to that because I had a conversation with a recreational therapist once, and we were talking about how to reframe goal. Because when parents get to therapy, the classic therapist says, what are your goals? I don't know. This is new for me. I don't know. He's 2. I don't know what our goals are. So then they would have a conversation. What's important to your family? What does your family think is fun? What are the things that you want to do? And then they would use that. So I remember a family that they were a biking family. That's what they did. They biked everywhere. And so the recreational therapist was able to sort of look at, okay, let's look at adaptive bikes, or let's look at ways that the child can bike. What can we do to support them? How can we? And so to your point, Dr. Rosenbaum, you didn't remove the therapy, but you used the therapeutic intervention to help to meet some of those goals so it became meaningful.
Yes, and I feel as a parent that we need to have that support from the healthcare professional, because we are so new to this journey and we don't know that. But if it comes from you, physician or therapist, it helps us to reframe ourselves and put us in a good path. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Rosenbaum, you opened one of your articles with a quote from Dr. William Osler. Good physician treated the disease and a great physician treated the patients who has the disease. I love this. I'm going to put in every presentation when I go out now, because I absolutely love that. And I feel if every time we go to either a physician or a therapy, and if it comes with that approach, it put us parents in a better position to become that parent to that child and work with all of this.
Let me tell you a shorter version of Osler's quote from a parent with whom I work, who said to us in the course of a research study we were doing, she said, "You have textbooks, we have storybooks." Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
And that became the topic of an editorial I wrote, and Elizabeth, the parent, and I then did a podcast about it. And I think what it captured was the difference, and it goes back to Gabby's question right at the beginning, what is cerebral palsy? And partly it depends who's asking.
Mm-hmm.
The difference in perspective between a medical understanding of cerebral palsy and a family's understanding. So I have textbooks, you have storybooks,
Mm-hmm.
and your individual story, your values, as Brenda said so beautifully a minute ago, your experiences need to be balanced against whatever advice I have. And the advice I give you about your situation has to be appropriate to your storybook.
Right.
Absolutely. Okay, let's bring our audience into this conversation. You have here Farah. Farah is from Toronto, and she's an X25 week. She doesn't have CP, but has something similar to CP called facial dystonia. Farah, thank you so much for joining us here. Farah is always present in every event related to prematurity, and she volunteers here at CPBF as well. So Lori made a final comment here. We're being encouraged to play catch up right now as we are just delayed. So we aren't at a level where we are being told that he might not catch up and we should adjust. Thank you, Lori.
Can I make a comment? Just make a comment about Lori's situation. And clearly I am not talking about your son, I think. But I'd like to think about the difference between being what we call delayed. In other words, you're 14 months and you're not walking yet, which is a little bit delayed compared to the average, and making the difference between that and a child who has problems in controlling their motor function. So if your 14-month-old crawls beautifully and explores wildly all day, I'm not worried about them at all, even though they are so-called delayed. Whereas if they're having trouble to sit independently or to crawl, that gives me a different way of looking at the child. So sometimes delayed is just, wait till the next bus. And sometimes it's delayed because there are problems in how things are working.
Okay, thank you. So I have a comment here or a question from Elmer. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate much your courage as you discuss this childhood matters. On your experience, IVH grade 4 on neonates, how would you help the family decision on this matter? IVH grade 4, quality of life in the future. Thanks.
I've never treated an X-ray or an ultrasound. What I want to know is tell me about the child who's had the IVH. And sadly, and I'm being a little bit rude here, sadly, some people will predict based upon the laboratory findings or the X-ray findings. And my conversation with the family would be, there's been some bleeding in the brain, and we're concerned about that. These are the kinds of things we're going to be watching to see what your child does and how they do it. But I'm not going to predict that life is over. I'm not going to predict that everything's going to be fine. And I think we as professionals need to be prepared to go along on the journey and see what's happening without painting a bleak picture and without giving a false hope just because it's too uncomfortable otherwise. So I don't know what, it depends how old the child is. If the child's 3 and they have trouble doing things, then they may have trouble doing things because they had an intraventricular hemorrhage. If the child's 3 weeks or even 3 months, I want to see what they're going to do when they're 6 months and 9 months and 12 months before I make a prediction or a diagnosis.
Agreed.
So let me bring a comment from Heather. Heather is a big family advocate in our system. We love her. Such a family-centered way to talk about all of our kids. Thank you, Heather, for watching us here today. I also have a comment from Sarah. Absolutely beautiful, giving us goosebumps. Thank you, Sarah. And Lori added here, this is a great talk. We are definitely embracing the F words, awesome perspective. He completes our family. Thank you, Lori. I did share the link for the F words from the Can Child website. Dr. Rosenbaum, let's talk a little bit about the GMFCS, and you can explain what it is and how we use in a clinic. And Brenda, I also want your insight on that.
Mm-hmm.
In many areas of medicine, we have classification systems. And I'll use an example outside of our field, which is Hodgkin's disease. Hodgkin's disease is a kind of cancer. And you can have stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, or stage 4. That's the classification. So I've just found out I have Hodgkin's disease, and I'm really upset because I've got cancer. And the specialist says to me, well, the good news is it's stage 1. And I say, what the hell does that mean? It's still cancer. And he or she is able to say, yes, but what we know about stage 1 is the outlook, the treatment, and so on. And what we have done, to go back to cerebral palsy, we typically have talked about mild, moderate, and severe. And I think those are 3 words that should be removed from the English language and, quite frankly, from the Italian language and every other language, because they are meaningless. They are value judgments. And if I tell you your child's problem is mild, I'm basically saying, it could be worse. And that deserves, from as far as I'm concerned, a kick in the shins. Mm-hmm. So what we tried to do was to create a classification system that described different levels of functioning. First of all, that talked about what people can do rather than what they cannot do. So level 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5 are descriptions of what kids are doing at different ages, kids with cerebral palsy. And it turns out that that system is reliable, which means that if several of us look at the same child, we're going to come up with the same classification. It turns out that it's valid in the sense that it's meaningful, that somebody in level 3 is functioning motorically better than somebody in level 4, but not as well as somebody in level 2. And we have very, very good evidence of that. It also turns out that the levels after the age of 2 are stable over time. And by some good luck and some work we did many years ago, I can also tell you what your child's long-term outlook for motor function is going to be after the age of 2, based on their GMFCS level at 2. Now, that's not just that's based upon lots of information and data. What it is not is an assessment. What it does not tell you is anything else besides whole body movement and posture. It doesn't tell you about hand function or hearing or vision or learning or personality or anything else. But it turns out to be incredibly useful and is used all over the world.
Brenda, you had some input on the redesign of that infographic.
So it took me a long time to have a good relationship with the GMFCS. It took me, again, a while to view it from the perspective, as Dr. Rosenbaum said, that it is a tool that is used by clinicians to keep consistency and all those things that he mentioned as to why it is the gold standard and why it is utilized across the world. But it's still difficult as a parent when you're looking at a spectrum and you receive a diagnosis that your child is, on one end of the spectrum versus the other end of the spectrum. But so a couple of observations. So one is that there was initially an infographic, as I mentioned, this is used across the world. And cerebral palsy is hard to understand sometimes, and the language is hard to understand, and the predictions or the can-dos or all those things, they can be very difficult to process. And so an infographic was developed as a knowledge translation piece to be able to say to parents, as you're talking about this, here's the, the different levels of GMFCS, and here's visually what that might represent. And the old infographic for a GMFCS child who was GMFCS level 5, it would show the child in a wheelchair with their head down. It would show them in a stander with their head down, or tilted back with a strap across their head. And I remember seeing that and being devastated, because that was really the first visual representation that I had of what this diagnosis and this classification would mean for him. And so I've always said to people that, how you give a diagnosis and the way that you package that can really set the tone for the trajectory moving forward. And so when you have something negative in front of you like that, it's very difficult to process. And I'd heard it from a number of other families. And so we brought this up to the team and had some great conversations. And one day I got this, it was a Christmas present, because one day an email came from Dr. Rosenbaum in December, and he said, we would like to review, or we are reviewing the infographic, and we'd love to have your input on, the illustrations that are being utilized. And I'll tell you two things. One was, oh my gosh, they listened, which is incredible. That's a really great parent partnership, right? Piece. And so they listened, and I thought immediately too, wow, hopefully this will change that trajectory for some of those other families when they look at this infographic. And I'm still so proud of it to this day. I can look at it without feeling discouraged or upset, because it is just a little bit more positive and a little bit more optimistic. And that's not to say that we're sugarcoating things, but it just was a nicer way to look at this infographic. And the nice thing too about the infographic now is that I find it's being used alongside the F words. And so when the infographic is discussed and the GMFCS is shown, there's a whole conversation with some clinicians that will say, but then are you familiar with the F words, of childhood disability? So I think it's a great pairing of the two to be able to help each other in that.
Absolutely.
Let me just add a quick comment that the GMFCS was developed by our group at CanChild. The infographic that Brenda's referring to was a set of drawings created by colleagues in Melbourne, Australia, with whom we work closely. And it was a brilliant idea. We should have thought of it. They did, and they have, Bill, the artist, was very good at it. But what became an obvious limitation that Brenda and others brought to us was addressed without any hesitation or any defensiveness. So it's a collaboration between CanChild and Australia and Brenda Agnew.
And parents.
And other parents.
And I am sharing the website here because there's a lot of tools. All those tools are actually on their website. Yeah. I just want us to talk a little bit about parenting, because obviously us parents are very affected when we receive a diagnosis and how we process and how you deal with all that. So let's talk about achievements in parenting a child with disability and how we're going to measure success in parenting when you have. Brenda, you already? Okay, let's start with you.
Okay. Boy, oh boy. Well, I will tell you, I have two teens. Mclean is my younger son. He's much easier than my older son, if that tells you anything. But this changes over time. And I think I mentioned earlier about the ability to look at your goals and what they mean for your family and what those milestones look like. And I think, I look a lot at things that so when I had been told things that he would not do at the time, they were extremely devastating. I now use them as a framework to say, haha, he actually does those, and not in a mean way, but in a celebratory way. And so, when I take him out for a steak dinner and he has his steak and he tells me how good it is, was never going to eat orally and was never going to be verbal. Those are some things to celebrate. And when I have a really bad day, which we do have, and I do sometimes focus on the deficits that Mclean has, and I do focus on his limitations because I'm his mom and that just happens. It does bring me back sometimes to look back and say, wow, I have a great kid who's smart, who has friends, who's going to high school, who loves Marvel, who has shown us some amazing adventures in our time, who has changed the way that I perceive disability, not just for him, but for others. The work that I do, the advocacy, the things I've become involved with, those are because of Mclean. Those are all great things. The people I've met, all of that is because of what we have gone through. And those are gentle reminders on those days that are not so good, that there is good in this. And I am a good mom, and I am a good parent, because I've given him all of those chances in life, and I continue to give those, and I love him with all my heart, and I accept him for who he is. And that's a place you have to get to. And it's a nonstop process. It really is.
I agree 100%. You always make me cry because you're amazing, Brenda, and how much work you do for this community. It's just amazing. I want to share here the link to the Facebook group, because this is such an incredible support for families with kids with neurological disorders. It's a group with a lot of resources, and we go there to vent and cry on each other's shoulders, even though some names you only know by names. You don't know who they really are, but we actually know them deeply because you have this bond. And we are very grateful to you for starting this group and continue this group after so many years. We cannot do this alone. Absolutely cannot do this alone. We need that network. We need the peer support. Dr. Rosenbaum, how else can we support parents?
By listening, by recognizing their successes without being cheesy about it, by reminding all of us as parents that we're not really in charge. I like to say that parenting is a dance led by the children. And this comes out, as you said earlier, I do the neonatal follow-up clinic, and I've done it for decades. And we see a lot of premature twins and triplets. And I always ask the parents, tell me how they're different. And they roll their eyes and say, oh my goodness. And I heard this 2 days ago. I saw 2 sets of twins. And in both cases, they're substantially different people. And even when they're identical, they're different people. And so I said to one mother, do you love them the same? She said, yeah, and got quite indignant and thought I was sure she was going to report me to the college for being abusive. But she knew I was teasing her. And then I said, do you treat them the same? She said, yeah. No. And she got it. She understood what I was getting at. And I use this in my teaching to help people understand that each child brings their own special ways of being, belonging, becoming, and how we respond to them. We have the same values. We love them the same, but each child elicits things from us and teaches us. And Brenda said it so beautifully about the things that she has learned as an individual, as a parent, as a professional, based upon that experience. Now, that's not to sugarcoat it and say, well, it's all going to be fine. It is to say that this is an adventure, not the adventure you might have thought you were on, but work with it, see where it's going, be part of it, and don't just be unhappy because it isn't what you thought it was going to be. For most of us who have adult kids, my kids are adult kids, they're all great kids. They're not doing what I thought they would do or should do.
Yeah.
That's my problem, not theirs.
That is so powerful. I think I'm going to freeze that piece of the video and play it.
Well, Fabi, can I make one comment on that too?
Yeah.
Is that when I think about regrets, I try not to have too many regrets, but what I do really regret are the times that I lost focus on what was important because I was so focused on, I think, what the wrong things were. And I know every parent goes through that, but there were times when I was, there's been times over the last 14 years that I wasn't present and I was absent because I was so consumed with his diagnosis and the possibility of a bleak future and all of these things. And I think that it's true. Time goes by very fast. And, That's the one thing I regret, is that I wasn't able to be more present, and that I was so focused on some of those negatives that really now I try to focus a little bit more on the positives, because I don't want to miss out on those. I really don't.
Can I make a quick comment about regret? It's something I've been interested in for a very long time. I'm interested in it because we can't undo it. No. I mean, I can be rude to Brenda and feel just act stupid, and tomorrow I can call her up and say, look, I was in a bad mood or whatever. I can apologize, and hopefully we can get past it. But if a situation that doesn't allow for getting back at things is a problem that we stay with. And I have often thought about part of my role as a physician, as a health professional, is to try to help people prevent regret.
That's a good point.
That's beautiful. I will share that actually I was in Kamloops this summer visiting the residential school, and there was this beautiful note on the floor that we can't change the past, but we can make a better future for all. Obviously, this message was for the families, for the residential schools, and for all of us as a society. But I think this quote also applies to all of us in any circumstance. Like for us parents, that if we have regrets or anything that we did or not do with our kids when they were little, I think it is, we cannot change what happened. And for me, I was on a fight or flight mode for a few years with no sleep, and I wasn't really present. So I can't really look back, as Brenda said, but I look forward and I look for today. What can I do today to make our lives more fulfilled and happy, even with all the challenges that we have on a daily basis? There are many. But let's talk about World CP Day. It's next week, October 6th. It's Green for CP. It is a worldwide campaign. 6 million people around the world live with CP. And the beautiful campaign going on this year, 6 million reasons, on the World CP Day website. Brenda, what does this day means to you?
This is a big day for awareness. I've used this day to spread messages of understanding and meaning when they come to cerebral palsy. I've seen these embraced by our friends and family and in the schools that Mclean has attended. It really is an opportunity to sort of say, this is cerebral palsy, this is where it is. This might be what the definition is, but that doesn't mean that means what it is for every child. And it really has just become a day that we celebrate. We celebrate cerebral palsy on that day. We look at all the fantastic accomplishments that have happened with research and the advancements that have happened, and what it's meant for our family. And so for us, it's actually a really great day. We really enjoy that day. It's not a day of upset. It's a day of celebration and awareness, and that's how we've always approached it.
Absolutely. And Dr. Rosenbaum, what it is to you, and how important it is for the community of clinicians this day?
Well, I'm not going to say anything after what Brenda just said. I'll answer your question about clinicians. I think it's really important that service providers understand possibilities and not just see what isn't. And we're still in a situation where people are giving dire prognosis and dire predictions, and that's just inappropriate. It isn't to say we should pretend there aren't problems or isn't a risk of problems, but the way we talk about them and the way we focus on functioning and adapting and becoming is vastly different from telling parents their child is a dish rag and then telling them to take the dish rag home and love it.
Wow, I think we can end with this because that was powerful. Dr. Rosenbaum, thank you so much for joining us here today. Brenda, thank you. I think we could stop for another few hours. This is never enough time talking to the two of you and learning from you, sharing your expertise and experience. I'm very grateful to both of you for joining us here today.
Thank you very much. It's a
pleasure.
Thank
you so much.
Always fun to be with Brenda.
The feeling is mutual. Thank you so much to both of you.
And to all of you watching us live from home, from the hospital, thank you so much for joining our live session today. All these sessions are actually recorded and on our website, which is right here, canadianpreemies.org. And I want to thank our sponsors, AstraZeneca and Waterwise, for their ongoing support to our education sessions. And we are a charitable organization, and we believe that through education and support, we can empower families, ensuring they are ready to care for their premature baby. Visit our website, consider making a donation. Together, we can create a brighter future for all our families. And I see you again next Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you, everyone.